Hey guys, tonight we slip through time into a floating palace, one that's glittering with chandeliers, humming with violins, and somehow smells like roasted quail and shoe polish. You're standing at the foot of the grand staircase on the RMS Titanic, but instead of worrying about lifeboats or icebergs, you're focused on something far more pressing. What's for dinner? Or breakfast? Or tea? Honestly, the Titanic serves so many meals it could pass for a floating buffet with a tragic twist. You're about to spend the night exploring every crumb, every course, and every crust of bread served aboard the most famous ship in history. And yes, you probably won't survive this voyage, not because of an iceberg, but because the fifth course involves something called veal and ham pie. And that's just unholy. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know where you're listening from and what time it is. I love seeing bedtime spread across the globe. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive on April 10, 1912. The ship is gleaming a symphony of steel velvet and polished mahogany. You're technically in third class, but for the sake of this dreamy little history tour, we'll go wherever the food is hot and the doors aren't locked. You step into the first-class dining saloon. It stretches nearly the full width of the ship and could seat over 500 people. It's designed to look like a French chateau, which is a fancy way of saying you're not allowed to sneeze in here. The scent is immediate. Warm bread, melting butter, a faint whiff of consommé, and that waxy perfume of mustaches freshly combed into place. Breakfast is wrapping up. Waiters, young men in white gloves, probably underpaid and definitely overworked, whisk away silver domes from porcelain plates. Toast crumbs litter the pristine tablecloths like civilized debris. This morning's breakfast is simple by first-class standards. Grilled kidneys, eggs cooked however you like, bacon with just the right crispness, fried potatoes, rolls, marmalade, and tea, strong enough to start arguments. Oh, and kippers, because what's luxury without fish that smells like revenge? Most passengers eat at a polite pace. They've just woken up in suites with fireplaces and private promenades after all. Some read newspapers. Others chat about the upcoming stops. A few try to one-up each other in a competitive game called I Know Someone Who Dined with the King. But here's a fun twist. Not everyone shows up for breakfast. The most exclusive guests have personal stewards who bring meals to their rooms. Imagine lying in bed while someone delivers you poached eggs and hot chocolate on a silver tray. Historians still argue whether this practice was out of privacy pretension or just a deep hatred for morning small talk. The menu printed daily offers more than a dozen options. There's kedgeree, an Anglo-Indian dish of rice, fish, and eggs, because colonialism shows up even on toast. There's cold meats, corned beef hash, and grilled chops. Everything's plated with precision. Even the butter looks like it graduated from a finishing school. What's surprising is how much the food reflects Edwardian social hierarchy. Breakfast isn't just about nutrition, it's about class performance. The types of eggs you order, the way you butter your toast, even whether you call the tea strong or robust, these are silent codes. You can almost hear a Downton Abbey butler whispering, "The lady prefers soft-boiled." Very soft. Oh, and fruit, always served last like a chaperone, making sure things don't get too decadent. Fresh pineapple slices, stewed prunes, the original detox, and chilled oranges. They're sliced so precisely, they look like geometry assignments. But here's where it gets quietly fascinating. Many of these ingredients weren't just stocked once at port. The Titanic had a literal floating pantry. Thousands of pounds of meat, fish, eggs, butter, and vegetables were stored in refrigerated holds, stacked in wooden crates, and wrapped in straw. They even brought on 40 tons of potatoes. Yes, tons. Because British people panic if there aren't 3 types of carbs at every meal. In fact, historians still argue whether some of the fresh fruit and eggs were meant to last the entire voyage, or if Titanic planned to restock mid-crossing in Queenstown, Ireland. Given how refrigeration worked back then, big blocks of ice, and hope it's fair to wonder just how fresh some of those bananas stayed by day 5. And just to make your midnight snack dreams more vivid, The Titanic carried over 1,500 gallons of milk and 36,000 apples. Let that lull you to sleep or haunt you with visions of endless apple peeling. So you finish your imaginary plate, dab your lips with an embroidered napkin, and step out of the saloon as the orchestra begins to warm up. You can almost hear the clink of china being reset for the next meal, because on the Titanic the plates barely cooled before the next round of gluttony arrived. You stroll down the polished corridor, the soles of your shoes tapping softly on the linoleum, and suddenly it's a new hour, a new appetite, and a new kind of menu. It's still before noon, but we're talking about first-class breakfast, and this isn't some soggy muffin or rushed coffee situation. Oh no, this is a performance, a ritual, a multi-course meditation on how the rich start their day when surrounded by 46,000 tons of luxury steel. You step into the a la carte restaurant, an exclusive venue within the already exclusive first-class experience. Unlike the main dining saloon, this restaurant operates more like a high-end Parisian cafe, complete with a separate staff and the attitude to match. You'll need a reservation and probably a monocle. The hostess greets you with a nod that says, "You may be fabulously wealthy, but I am unimpressed." You're seated near a window with golden light filtering through thick curtains, dust dancing above a table set with more silverware than you could use in a day. A waiter appears with a practiced bow and hands you a menu that reads, "More like a romantic novella than a meal plan. Today's breakfast. A gentle selection of poached eggs on English muffins with bechamel sauce. Grilled kidneys again, because apparently no one's told these people that kidneys are an acquired taste. Lamb chops, smoked haddock anchovy toast, and fried tomatoes make the cut too. And of course, a separate list just for breads. Croissant brioche toast and delicate rolls that look like they could sue you for improper slicing. The food is indulgent but presented with restraint. That's the Edwardian way, eat like an emperor, but pretend it's all terribly modest. You sip a cup of French-pressed coffee served in a cup so thin you can see light through it. It's hot, smooth, and strong enough to make you consider launching a shipping empire. And beside it, a glass of fresh orange juice so rare and expensive in 1912 that most lower-class passengers wouldn't have even tasted it once in their lives. You swirl it gently and try not to look smug. One guest nearby is having deviled kidneys with mushrooms and toast. Across the room, someone is ordering eggs en cocotte with truffle oil. And in a hushed voice, a woman asks for her tea to be steeped precisely 3 minutes, which triggers the kind of silent nod from the waiter that says, "I too fear over-extraction." But the meal isn't just about food. It's about theater. Waiters glide like dancers. Plates are replaced with the grace of sleight of hand. And the diners, they're in no rush. The Titanic is unsinkable, remember? There's nowhere else they need to be. Historians still argue whether the a la carte restaurant was genuinely appreciated by all, or whether it was more of a social display, a way to be seen in a setting that wasn't the main saloon. But based on the fact that it was operated independently by Italian restaurateur Luigi Gotti, who sadly perished in the sinking, we know one thing for certain. The standards were high, the service immaculate, and the food was perhaps the best ever served at sea. A fringe detail not often mentioned, the restaurant staff didn't technically work for White Star Line. They were private employees hired by Gotti and had their own food, lodging, and working conditions. It's a reminder that even aboard a marvel like the Titanic, layers of hierarchy existed within the layers of luxury. As the meal progresses, a steward refills your cup and offers a slice of honeydew melon topped with preserved ginger, an Edwardian delicacy meant to cleanse the palate. You take a bite. It's sweet cold and just obscure enough to make you feel like a true connoisseur. Through the porthole, sunlight glints off the waves. You imagine the cold Atlantic outside, dark and vast, but here, inside this paneled cocoon of civility, it might as well be a Paris salon in springtime. The musicians are warming up in the distance, soft strains of a waltz floating through the corridor. The clink of china becomes part of the rhythm. A waiter clears your plate with a whisper of linen and leaves behind a delicate silver dish of crystallized fruit. It's decorative, but you eat it anyway. There's a moment, just a moment, when everything feels still, timeless. like this ship might really float forever carrying these meals into eternity. But then a bell rings faintly in the distance. Lunch preparations are beginning, and just like that, the breakfast table becomes a memory and your appetite begins to circle again. Now let's take the grand staircase down past the swirling ironwork and thick carpeting and drop all the way to the third-class dining saloon. You'll feel the shift instantly. No gilded mirrors, no liveried waiters, no 12-piece silver settings arranged by a man named Basil. Instead, you're in a room that feels more like a cheerful school cafeteria. Long wooden tables, bright white walls, plain floors, and the persistent clatter of utensils mixed with laughter and conversation in Irish, Swedish, Polish, and the occasional burst of Scottish. Third-class passengers, also called steerage, weren't expected to starve, and the Titanic was remarkably progressive in that sense. Unlike many other liners of the era, third-class travelers on this ship actually had dedicated dining rooms 3 full meals a day and plenty of fresh food. It wasn't fine dining, but it wasn't gruel and crusts either. This morning you sit down with a mismatched group. A young Irish couple immigrating to Boston, 2 Swedish brothers headed for a mining job in Montana, and a middle-aged Englishwoman shepherding 4 children, all with identical freckles and suspiciously sticky fingers. They're friendly, a little tired, and all nursing big mugs of tea, black bitter, and very much the fuel of the working class. The meal, porridge, thick, unsweetened, and served in big, honest bowls. There's milk to stir in, and sugar if you're lucky, but don't expect cinnamon swirls or chia seeds. You also get bread with butter, coarse, hearty slices that fill you up without fanfare. And sometimes, if the stars align and the cook's in a good mood, there's fried herring or bacon. This morning, just herring, salty, pungent, and oddly comforting once you stop expecting it to taste like brunch. You eat with a tin fork and sip tea from a plain ceramic mug. It's not elegant, but it's warm. It's steady. And for people who've spent their whole lives scraping meals together, this is a kind of luxury they haven't known before. A fringe detail. The menus were posted outside the saloon door each day. Third-class passengers didn't get to choose, but they did get to see what was coming. An innovation at the time. It gave people something to look forward to and a chance to teach their kids how to pronounce words like stew and sago. You glance around the room and notice how many children are here. Titanic carried more third-class children than first and second class combined. Most of them are too young to appreciate the ship's grandeur, but they certainly understand breakfast. One small boy is scraping his porridge bowl with such commitment, you're afraid he might tunnel through the table. You take another sip of tea. It's strong, probably overbrewed, but it cuts through the chill that clings to the lower decks. You can smell coal smoke faintly through the walls, and the rhythmic hum of the engines pulses underfoot like a giant mechanical heartbeat. Historians still argue whether third-class dining was purely a practical upgrade or a deliberate PR move by White Star Line to attract more emigrants. After all, word of mouth mattered, and nothing travels faster than a grandmother who tells everyone back home that Titanic served her roast beef. Speaking of roast beef, that's for supper. But we'll get there. For now, the dining saloon is filled with the sounds of family. Babies, fussing teenagers, whispering about America, and adults trading hopeful stories about where they're headed. You hear tales of land in Canada, railroad jobs in Pennsylvania, and cousins who already made it big in Chicago. Whether or not any of it's true isn't the point. It's breakfast conversation fueled by big dreams and baked bread. One quirky tidbit. A few passengers tried sneaking bits of first-class fare down into steerage. Stories survive of a first-class steward with a soft heart slipping a few pastries to a steerage family with kids. Apparently, the little girl thought the croissant was a bent bun and saved it to show her mother. Adorable and absolutely believable. As the meal ends, trays are cleared by a much smaller staff. Fewer stewards, less polish, but still attentive. You thank the cook on your way out, and she nods already elbow-deep in dough for lunch rolls. You pass a cork bulletin board where someone has tacked up today's schedule. Exercise on deck, a church service later, and yes, dinner at 5 sharp. Your stomach's already making plans. By now, you've had a full breakfast twice, if we're being honest, and wandered the ship from wood-paneled luxury to humble dining halls. But there's still something missing. Something quieter, cozier. Something British. You need tea, not the dramatic, gold-rimmed afternoon affair that comes later. Right now, it's time for the quiet, unofficial tea rituals that start around 10:30 m, especially among the first and second-class passengers. The Titanic didn't formally advertise 11s, but that didn't stop anyone from demanding it. You're on the most opulent ship in the world, and if you want a hot cuppa with a biscuit before noon, someone's going to bring it to you. So you return to the first-class reading and writing room, a serene space with armchairs upholstered in silk damask and tall windows that look out onto the glistening Atlantic. There's a hush in the air broken only by the rustle of newspapers and the clink of silver spoons against porcelain. A steward approaches almost too quietly to notice. "Tea, madam." "Sir," he whispers like it's a state secret. He brings a silver tray, steaming Earl Grey lemon wedges in a cut crystal dish, a small jug of milk, and 2 delicate shortbread biscuits so perfect they look like they were measured with a ruler. You balance the saucer in your lap, trying not to rattle it like someone who's never been to finishing school. Now here's your mainstream historical fact. Tea drinking was the social glue of Edwardian Britain. On Titanic, it functioned as a marker of class taste and general life satisfaction. It was the pause between one performance and the next, an intermission between layers of formality. It gave you an excuse to rest your corset-spread gossip and pretend you weren't counting down the hours until the next actual meal. Historians still argue whether 11s was officially acknowledged aboard Titanic, or simply evolved as a cultural habit brought aboard by the British upper class. Either way, the crew was prepared. The Titanic carried over 800 pounds of loose-leaf tea for the voyage, enough to supply every passenger on board for weeks. Even third-class passengers had access to tea, though theirs came in bulk tins with names like Bohea and Kongu types, you'd now only find in vintage apothecary shops or hipster cafes with too much reclaimed wood. Now let's step down a class, not in dignity, just in ticket price. The second-class passengers, mostly middle-class professionals, school teachers, and missionaries, were also well-versed in tea culture. Their lounge is less ornate, more like a parlor you'd find in a nice townhouse in Manchester. They sit by the fire, tea in hand, discussing literature, or perhaps how scandalous it is that some women on board smoke. Their tea service isn't quite silver, but it's still elegant. China cups modest biscuits and enough sugar cubes to sweeten the whole Atlantic. You overhear someone explaining the difference between oolong and Darjeeling, and someone else asking when lunch will start. The answer obviously is not soon enough. Meanwhile, the crew? Yes, even the crew has their own quiet tea breaks. Below deck, stewards and cooks take turns sneaking mugs of scalding hot tea from the kitchen urns. There's no biscuit tray, but someone's always got a crust of bread and the warmth is worth it. One steward drinks his with condensed milk from a tin, stirring it with the handle of a butter knife. Now for a quirky tidbit. Among the ship's supplies was something called tea essence, a concentrated liquid tea extract used when brewing loose leaf took too long. It was basically the Edwardian version of instant coffee, and stewards swore by it when time was tight. Not exactly a Michelin experience, but better than cold water and regrets. You lean back in your chair as the ship hums gently beneath you. Someone cracks open a copy of the Times. Someone else dozes off with their teacup still in hand. You can smell a hint of bergamot and linen starch. This moment is peaceful, but it's also fragile. Unwritten. These little in-between rituals don't always make the official accounts, but they're often the most human. You finish your cup and place the saucer gently back on the tray. Outside the window, the ocean stretches like hammered silver, and your thoughts begin to drift, just like the ship does, slowly, softly, into the next meal. The sun's past its midpoint, now casting long glints across the ocean and filtering into the dining saloons just in time for lunch, or as the first-class passengers might prefer to call it, luncheon. Because adding syllables makes everything more refined, obviously. You return to the first-class dining saloon, and things have leveled up since breakfast. Jackets are crisp, gloves have returned, and someone is wearing a monocle, not ironically. You slip into your seat and find today's luncheon menu already tucked beneath your folded napkin, like a secret waiting to be revealed. Let's walk through it, shall we? Appetizers range from pâté de foie gras to consommé fermier, which is quite literally farmer-style broth, because even rich people like to cosplay rustic now and then. Then come the cold meats ham tongue, corn docks sliced thin and arranged like edible upholstery. And then, of course, there's salmon mayonnaise. That's not a typo. It's a thing. It's pink cold and served in an artful mound that somehow looks like it has opinions about your outfit. But the real heart of lunch, entrees. You've got roast beef with horseradish cream, curried chicken with rice lamb with mint sauce, and a vegetable marrow farci that sounds suspiciously like someone tried to gentrify a zucchini. You take a bite of the lamb and it's perfectly tender, the mint cutting through with a grassy sharpness that makes you feel briefly like you might understand why British cuisine has defenders. Beside you, someone is struggling with a fish knife and pretending it's not obvious. Across the table, an older woman carefully deconstructs her stuffed marrow and dabs her lips with linen like she's in a food commercial. Now here's your mainstream fact. This wasn't a one-off luxury. First-class passengers on the Titanic dined like this daily. The ship's kitchen staff included over 60 cooks and assistants, plus teams for baking, roasting sauces, vegetables, and pastry. Each meal was a military-grade operation. Ingredients were logged, courses were timed, and the waiters moved with practiced choreography like Edwardian food ninjas. Historians still argue whether the elaborate menus were designed for genuine enjoyment or simply for class signaling. Was all that lamb and aspic truly delicious, or just a way to separate the steak knives from the butter knives of society? Either way, no one here is complaining. Not out loud. A steward refills your glass of white wine, not too dry, not too sweet, and you glance down at the dessert list. Peach compote, rice pudding, apple meringuetato, cheese and biscuits. The kind of finishing touches that don't demand your attention, but quietly imply you've made it in life. Oh, and yes, there's ice cream. A fringe detail. Titanic had an entire refrigeration system below deck that kept ice cream frozen long enough to serve it with warm pie in the middle of the Atlantic. Vanilla was most common, but whispers of strawberry and even orange blossom have survived in memoirs. Some claim it was churned daily. Others suggest it was pre-packed into molds shaped like swans. No one knows for sure. But wouldn't that be deliciously absurd? Lunch ends with a soft clink of cutlery and the polite scrape of chairs. No one lingers too long. There are promenade strolls to take books to read in the smoking lounge, and for some discreet naps behind lace curtains. You rise from your seat full, but not stuffed satisfied, yet somehow still thinking about dinner. The Titanic has a way of doing that, stretching your stomach and your imagination in equal measure. Outside, the sea sparkles. Somewhere far below, chefs are already prepping for the next round. You pass a steward in the hallway who smells faintly of tarragon and steam. You nod. He nods. And the ship sails on. Lunch was elegant, refined, almost suspiciously perfect. But not everyone aboard Titanic was dabbling in marrow farci and molded peach compote. Let's descend one deck and one socioeconomic rung to the second-class dining saloon, where lunch is still a proper affair, but with fewer forks and way less French. The room is bright and tidy, all pale paneling and functional charm. The chairs are bolted to the floor, less out of style, more out of practicality. And you sit beside a schoolteacher from Bristol and a Methodist minister who keeps patting his pockets like he's misplaced his sermon notes. The vibe is polite but casual. People talk across tables. There's laughter. Someone even sneezes and no one gasps. A steward brings the lunch menu. No silver font, no drama. But the offerings, surprisingly hearty. Let's break it down. First up, soup, usually a thick pea barley or vegetable broth, served with a slice of crusty bread and butter. Then come cold cuts, slices of ham-salted beef or roast mutton accompanied by pickles and mustard. A baked potato might make an appearance, and there's always a safe standby: boiled rice or macaroni with cheese. Your plate today holds roast beef potatoes and boiled cabbage along with a slice of brown bread, so sturdy it could double as insulation. But it's hot, it's filling, and it's real food-generous portions made with care. Now here's a mainstream historical fact. Second-class passengers on Titanic ate better than many middle-class families did back home. The White Star Line aimed to impress not just with price or comfort, but with dignity. Meals were a major part of that. These weren't scraps. They were thoughtfully planned menus cooked fresh every day and served by uniformed staff. And now for your quirky tidbit. Blancmange. It's a wobbly, milky jelly that haunts the dessert tray like a ghost of British puddings past. Today's flavor is almond molded into a fluted dome and topped with exactly one maraschino cherry. It looks like something out of a Victorian dollhouse and jiggles with the elegance of a nervous debutante. You try it. It's bland, but strangely comforting. A cup of tea follows. Second-class tea is strong, dark, and mercifully bottomless. There's no cream, just milk and sugar cubes stacked in a little dish like sugary dominoes. You drop one in your cup and swirl it slowly, watching the steam rise, as voices around you murmur about the sea, the weather, and what might be for supper. Historians still argue whether second-class menus were influenced more by first-class elegance or by the practical British boarding house tradition. They were certainly a hybrid. Roast meats and savory pies stood beside custards and fish sauces. Enough flair to feel special, but not so much that anyone reached for a French dictionary mid-meal. The minister beside you is delighted by the rice pudding spiced with a whisper of nutmeg. He offers a story about his last voyage, where the only dessert was stewed rhubarb served with regret. You laugh, and he adds solemnly, but the cutlery was divine. Second class was a space for quiet ambition. You could be a writer, a missionary, a businessman's wife, or a student headed to Yale. You had savings hopes and a suitcase that didn't require a porter. Lunch was more than food, it was a signal that you belonged somewhere in the in-between. Not yet rich, not quite poor, and comfortably overlooked. The steward clears your plate with a practiced swoop and hands you a small printed card. Tomorrow's menu preview. You skim it: veal and onions, tapioca pudding, boiled haddock. Not thrilling, but not terrible either. As you rise to leave, you pass a young couple holding hands beneath the table. Their fingers are sticky with jam. Behind them, a child leans too far back in his chair and nearly tips it over. His mother catches him mid-wobble, not missing a beat in her sentence about land deeds in Missouri. And just like that, second-class lunch ends not with a toast, but with a gentle exhale. No orchestras, no fanfare, just warm food, decent tea, and conversations that drift like smoke on the sea breeze. By now, you've strolled through formal luncheons and buttoned up blancmange. But let's drop even lower on the ship to steerage, where lunch is a very different kind of affair. Here, the third-class dining saloon is bustling. Long tables run end to end under low ceilings lined with families, laborers, and lone travelers who've stashed their suitcases under benches and their dreams somewhere ahead on the ocean. The walls are painted white for brightness. The floors are worn but clean, and there's always a murmur of a dozen languages blending into a single hum: hunger. You find your seat beside an Italian grandmother in black lace, 3 Danish boys, all named Eric, and a Welsh woman who brought her own tea tin just in case. The room smells of boiled vegetables, wood polish, and the lingering salt of Atlantic air carried in on woolen coats. Lunch arrives in a rush. No menus here. Stewards deliver heaping trays of food. Meat stew with thick gravy, hunks of fresh-baked bread, and boiled potatoes served family style. The plates are enamel-chipped but serviceable. The cutlery is plain and functional, and the portions, surprisingly generous. You ladle the stew onto your plate. It's made from beef trimmings and root vegetables, carrots, turnips, maybe a parsnip if luck was on your side. The broth is rich and peppery, the kind that clings to your ribs and smells like something your great-grandmother might have made over an open hearth. Mainstream historical fact time. Third-class passengers on Titanic received 3 full meals daily, a point proudly advertised by White Star Line. It was part of their effort to rebrand steerage, not as a grim, grimy affair, but as an affordable path to new opportunity with decent food, clean sheets, and yes, actual tables and chairs. That said, there were limits. You wouldn't find frilly puddings or chilled champagne here, but you would get coffee soup biscuits and boiled eggs. And most importantly, you got it without shame. Today's dessert, a dense raisin cake served warm with a spoonful of stewed apples on the side. It's not fancy, but it's sweet, sticky and shared. A small girl with ribbons in her hair offers you a second piece. You pretend to hesitate. You do not in fact hesitate. Here's your quirky tidbit. Titanic carried over 2,000 cabin biscuits for steerage passengers. What's a cabin biscuit, you ask? Imagine a dry, unsweetened hockey puck that dares you to enjoy it. Meant to last for weeks and hold up under salt air and sea motion, they were usually dunked in tea or coffee to avoid dental emergencies. Most passengers cheerfully ignored them if anything else was available, which luckily was often. Historians still argue whether steerage food quality was consistent across voyages, or if Titanic was an outlier. Many believe Titanic offered unusually high-quality third-class service as part of its PR campaign, what you might call Edwardian brand management. The message: you may not have caviar, but you'll arrive in America with a full belly and dignity intact. After lunch, the room lingers in a kind of contented afterglow. Children wriggle on benches. An older man rolls a cigarette while humming a Gaelic tune. Someone pulls out a harmonica. It's not a concert, just a moment of sound for the sake of sound. You clear your plate and wipe your hands on a napkin that's definitely been used before. Outside, the hallway smells of coal and soap. You pass a steward carrying a tray of teacups and nod. He's too busy to nod back, but he does tilt his tray to keep a cup from sliding off. That feels like something. Lunch in steerage isn't a performance, it's a necessity. But here, necessity is handled with care. No one's going hungry today, not even that one boy who just pocketed 2 biscuits for later. Smart kid. You climb the narrow stairs back toward the open deck, the sounds of lunch still echoing behind you. 3 decks, 3 different meals, but 1 ship, 1 ocean, and 1 unshakable truth. Everyone's already thinking about dinner. You've had lunch with the polished, the proper, and the plain-spoken. But where, you ask, did it all come from? Who made these endless meals appear with such quiet precision? Welcome to the galley Titanic's vast, sweating, clattering kitchen complex that stretched across multiple decks and functioned more like a floating military base than a restaurant. If the dining saloons were the stage, this was backstage, where the real magic and the real chaos happened. You step inside and the air changes instantly. It's hot. Not just warm, but wall of humidity, wet apron, smell of meat and metal hot. The clamor is constant. Knives on chopping blocks, ladles hitting iron pots, the hiss of steam, the sizzle of beef, and somewhere in the distance the sharp bark of a head chef losing his patience. Titanic had 5 main kitchens for first class, second class, third class crew, and the a la carte restaurant. That's not counting the butcher's room, bakery, scullery, pastry room, and the terrifyingly named vegetable preparation chamber. There were over 100 kitchen staff aboard, including cooks, assistants, dishwashers, bakers, and an army of utility boys who carried trays, stoked fires, and occasionally cried in walk-in pantries. You pass a cook bent over a cauldron of stock, muttering something about carrots too soft, while waving a ladle like a conductor's baton. Next to him, a teenager is peeling potatoes at lightning speed. He's done this so often, he doesn't even look down anymore. His hands move on instinct. He could do it in his sleep. He probably has. Mainstream historical fact. Titanic's kitchen served over 6,000 meals a day with separate menus for each class and crew level. Everything had to be made from scratch. No microwaves, no freezers, no food processors. Just knives, muscle, and the occasional act of culinary desperation. And here's your fringe detail. The Titanic's pastry chef brought aboard dozens of custom molds to shape jelly desserts, creams, and ice creams into little towers, domes, and floral arrangements. One of them was shaped like a swan, and yes, it was reportedly used to serve molded rice pudding, shaped like an actual waterfowl. Nothing says excess like eating a bird made of dessert while floating on a ship destined to hit an iceberg. Historians still argue whether the kitchen staff was stretched too thin to keep standards high, especially as the voyage wore on. Some claim early meals were exquisite, but by day 5 cooks were improvising more than they admitted. But no passenger memoirs complain. Not about the food. They remember the roasts, the soups, the warmth. You move deeper into the bakery, flour dusts the air like snowfall. Titanic had its own bakehouse running 247 to provide fresh bread and pastries for every meal. Over 40,000 eggs were brought on board, 13,000 grapefruits, 200 pounds of coffee. The numbers start to sound made up after a while, like someone filling a Noah's Ark of groceries. But here it's all real. You pass racks of crusty loaves lined up like soldiers, croissants cooling beside thick brown rolls for third-class tables. A baker with flour in his hair reaches for a tray of still-rising dough and grins like he hasn't slept in 2 days. He probably hasn't. The galley's heat sticks to your skin. You hear a bell ring 3 times. Prep is starting for afternoon tea. A boy races by with a bucket of peeled apples. Someone yells, "Mind the scald?" And you step back just in time to avoid a tidal wave of boiling water being dumped into a drain. It's a dance down here. No chandeliers, no napkins folded like swans. Just fire, sweat, steam, and discipline. Every plate served above started life down here in these cramped spaces between bulkheads and boilers. You exit back into the hallway with a new respect for the invisible army below decks. They didn't dine on fine roast duck or delicately fluted blancmange, but without them, nobody did. You've wandered from the swan-molded rice pudding of first class to the heat-choked chaos of the galley. Now it's time to step into something a bit more civilized again, but with just enough sugar and scandal to keep things interesting. Welcome to afternoon tea on the Titanic. It's 4:00 sharp, and the world aboard the ship slows for a moment. Not because of emergencies or icebergs or telegrams from New York, but because it's tea time. And when you're sailing first class, the rules of the ocean are nothing compared to the rules of polite society. You're seated in the first-class lounge this time, not the main dining saloon. The lounge is a quiet, luxurious space filled with plush chairs, stained glass skylights, and the occasional faint cough from someone pretending not to gossip. It's the kind of room where even the armrests have opinions. A steward glides by with a 3-tier tray, silver obviously stacked with finger sandwiches, scones, pastries, and tiny fruit tarts that look like they were assembled by elves with art degrees. The sandwiches are crustless, delicate little triangles filled with cucumber smoked salmon egg and cress, and something called potted shrimp that smells both fancy and suspicious. You pick up a scone. It's still warm, crumbly, and smells like butter and nostalgia. And now comes the eternal debate. Cream first or jam first? Historians still argue whether Titanic passengers followed the Cornish method jam first, then clotted cream, or the Devon method cream, first then jam. The Cornish would say one thing, the Devonshire crowd another, and somewhere in the middle, a passenger from Chicago probably shrugged and dunked the whole thing in tea. Monster, you go jam first, because you're an artist, not a barbarian. Mainstream fact. Afternoon tea had become a deeply ingrained British ritual by the Edwardian era, especially among the upper class. But aboard Titanic, it was more than tradition. It was theater. It offered passengers a genteel way to pass the afternoon between luncheon and the spectacle of dinner. It also provided prime opportunity for discreet people watching. A widow in lavender whispers behind a lace fan about someone's unfortunate second cousin. 2 gentlemen argue quietly over the merits of Irish whiskey versus Highland Scotch. And in the corner, a young debutante pretends to read a novel, but hasn't turned a page in 10 minutes. She's watching him, the one with the perfectly tailored coat and the questionable reputation. A fringe detail. Titanic carried nearly 800 pounds of loose-leaf tea stored in wooden crates in the cargo hold. That included blends like Darjeeling Assam Earl Grey and Lapsang Souchong. The most expensive teas were reserved for first class, but second class got decent brews as well, And even third class was served strong black tea boiled good and proper in the ship's massive kettles. You take a bite of a fruit tart topped with a glazed strawberry that reflects the room like a tiny mirror. It's sweet tart, and clearly the kind of thing someone once studied in culinary school for weeks. Nearby, a steward offers a choice between lemon drizzle sponge and Victoria sandwich cake. You go with the Victoria sponge, 2 layers of soft yellow cake with strawberry jam and whipped cream in the middle. Named for a queen, fit for a ship. Some passengers skip the tea and opt instead for sherry or port, their pinkies rising higher with each sip. A few sneak off with glasses of champagne, officially discouraged between meals, but rules were often bendable at 24 knots. The conversation turns to dinner reservations, then drifts to New York, then back to the weather. A man sighs and says, "No ice in sight." A woman laughs a little too long. You sip your tea and time slows again. There's something about the light at this hour, the way it slants through the high windows, catches on the polished silverware, and makes every pastry look like a Fabergé egg. It's a kind of peace that feels curated, almost too perfect. You set your empty cup back on the saucer with a soft clink. Tea is over, just like that. The trays are cleared, the crumbs brushed away, and the steward bows with the kind of dignity usually reserved for royalty or very polite cats. You stand full but still curious. Dinner's hours away, but that's a whole other kind of performance. For now you wander the deck, the sea calm and endless below you. And if your thoughts drift back to the strawberry tart or the scone well, that's just the magic of afternoon tea. You're full of scones and secrets now, walking slowly along the open deck as the salt air sharpens your senses. But not everyone aboard is lounging in afternoon tea parlors or sipping sherry while nibbling cucumber sandwiches. Down on the lowest decks, life moves differently. Let's return to steerage, where between meals don't involve silver trays or monogrammed linens. But they do exist. It's a quiet kind of sustenance here. A world of small bites, shared snacks, and whatever you've managed to stash in your trunk or pocket. You step into a third-class common room, where a few families are gathered around benches playing cards, braiding hair, and pulling food out of handkerchiefs as casually as magicians. Here's the scene. A mother unwraps a wedge of cheese from wax paper and divides it among her children. A young man shares strips of dried fish caught before he ever boarded the ship. There are apples from Belfast, walnuts from Italy, and a suspicious-looking jar of pickled something that no one questions. These aren't meals. They're tokens from home, edible reminders of where they came from, and maybe what they left behind. Mainstream historical fact. Third-class passengers were allowed to bring food on board, and many did. Because while the Titanic provided full meals, people in steerage didn't fully trust that promise, or just preferred a familiar taste now and then. Salted meats, preserved fruits, tea tins, hard cheeses, and dried bread were common stowaways. One family beside you unwraps a small loaf of rye bread, dense and dark. They butter it using a wooden-handled spreader and pass it around without fuss. It's not glamorous, but it's nourishing, and, more importantly, it tastes like home. Here's your quirky tidbit. Titanic had a third-class pantry, a small supply area stocked with extras, tea biscuits, condensed milk, even emergency rations. If someone missed a meal or needed food at odd hours, the pantry steward could help. It wasn't room service, but it was service nonetheless, and that small gesture of consideration was rare for steerage passengers on other lines. You sip tea from a chipped cup brewed from a tin that's been steeped 3 times too many. It's bitter and smoky, but oddly comforting. A teenage boy offers you a corner of a treacle biscuit, sweet, sticky, hard as a rock. You accept. It's like eating history sugared. Historians still argue whether these between-meal moments were officially acknowledged by the ship's staff or simply tolerated. There's evidence that some stewards encouraged them, especially for families with small children, while others insisted food be eaten only in designated dining rooms. But down here, practicality always won. The air smells of laundry and tea leaves. Someone sings softly in Swedish. A little girl sneaks 2 sugar cubes into her coat pocket. Someone else pulls out a tin whistle. The melody is cheerful and haunting all at once, like something carried across oceans for generations. You glance around and realize something. While first-class passengers have the luxury of excess steerage, passengers have the richness of community. Every shared apple slice or passed piece of bread tells a story of faith, of hope, of a future just over the horizon. One man stands by the railing at the back of the ship looking out at the churned-up trail of ocean behind them. He bites into a piece of jerky chews slowly and doesn't speak. You join him for a moment, not because you need food, but because you understand the hunger for what's next. And in that silence, with the sea yawning out forever behind you, the soft hum of the engines beneath your feet, and the salt breeze in your hair, you begin to realize. These snacks weren't just food, they were resistance. It's evening now. The lamps glow softly behind frosted glass. The hum of the engine seems gentler somehow, and you can almost smell the anticipation in the air. It's not just dusk, it's time. The dinner bell rings. You're back in first class, and this isn't just a meal. It's the main event. The gowns are floor length. The tuxedos are starched and sharp. Diamonds glint from wrists and ears. Every hair is pinned in place, every smile rehearsed. And beneath it all, an electric undercurrent of ceremony. A steward opens the carved wooden door to the first-class dining saloon. Light spills out in golden waves. The white-gloved staff are already moving plates, flying silently from kitchen to table, glasses catching the glow of chandeliers, and the crisp rustle of linen echoing beneath the quiet swell of string music. You take your seat among a table of strangers who all pretend to be old friends. Then the menu lands in front of you. You unfold it. It's long, possibly sentient. There are 11 courses, not counting the wine pairings, and the font seems chosen specifically to shame your French pronunciation. Tonight's offerings include oysters, consommé Olga, poached salmon with mousseline sauce, filet mignon Lily, sauté chicken lyonnaise, lamb with mint sauce, roast duckling with applesauce, sirloin of beef with chateau potatoes, pâté de foie gras, Waldorf pudding, peaches in chartreuse jelly, chocolate and vanilla eclair, assorted cheeses, fresh fruit, coffee. You blink. You pick something, anything, and trust the staff to ferry you through this culinary marathon without judgment. Here's your mainstream fact. This menu is authentic. It's based on the actual first-class dinner served on April 14, 1912, the final night before the iceberg. These were the last meals many passengers ever tasted, and their flavors are burned into history, like candle wax on silver. The first course arrives. Oysters plump, chilled and briny, served on a bed of crushed ice with a wedge of lemon and no hint of what's to come. You slurp politely, pretending you enjoy it because that's what society demands. Conversation hums around you. Someone's quoting Byron. Someone else is discussing stock prices. A woman near the window sighs and says, "I do hope we see whales." Next up, consommé Olga, a crystal clear veal broth with thin slices of sturgeon and a delicate flavor that tastes like someone whispered onion into a boiling pot. It's elegant and just salty enough to feel important. And here's your quirky tidbit. Titanic's first-class menus didn't just cater to British and American palates. They included Russian caviar, Italian vermicelli, and French desserts, reflecting a level of global fusion rare for the time. The chefs were trained in continental cuisine, and the head chef Charles Proctor was known for being both exacting and quietly theatrical. Rumor has it he demanded that soufflés never sit for more than 90 seconds before reaching the table. Drama. Historians still argue whether the length of these dinners was about genuine enjoyment or a social power game. The longer the meal, the more chances to impress, flirt, negotiate, and be seen. If you left after 5 courses, it might mean you weren't really part of the elite, or that you feared your corset might mutiny. As more courses arrive, you notice how the staff never breaks rhythm. A different spoon for every soup, a different knife for each entree, wine poured with a silent nod. Someone beside you is explaining the difference between a Chateau Margaux and a Burgundy, and you're nodding as if you didn't just mentally replace all wine terms with red and white. The roast duck is tender. The beef is decadent. The Waldorf pudding is cold and squishy and weirdly satisfying. You lose track of time. You lose track of forks. Eventually, there's coffee and cigars and a fruit plate with grapes so perfectly plump they look fake. By the time you stand, hours have passed. Your feet ache. Your jaw is tired. You are so full. And still you think, maybe you'll try the eclair on the way out. For the road. For history. The dining saloon empties slowly like a theater after curtain call. Waiters clear plates with military precision. You walk back into the hallway, the taste of vanilla and coffee still lingering on your tongue. Somewhere far below the engines churn forward. You don't know it yet, but this was the last full dinner ever served on the RMS Titanic. But tonight the music still plays, the wine still flows, and dessert is never denied. Dinner is underway and you're pacing yourself like a polite marathon runner in evening wear. You've just survived oysters and roast duck, and now, true to Edwardian form, it's time for the soup course. Because yes, even after you've eaten your way through 6 appetizers and a small farmyard, there's still soup. A waiter glides up to you with a porcelain bowl shimmering with something so clear, it looks like golden glass. This is consommé Olga, a refined, clarified veal broth infused with the essence of sturgeon, garnished with thin cucumber slices and herbs so delicate they might float away if you exhale too hard. You lift the spoon. The aroma is light, savory, and shockingly elegant for what is at its core. Very fancy meat water. It's warm, comforting, and oddly grounding, like the culinary version of someone gently patting your head and telling you you're doing great. Mainstream historical fact. Consommé was a staple of upper-class dining in the Edwardian era, seen as a measure of the chef's skill. To make it properly, stock had to be slowly simmered and repeatedly clarified, using a mixture of egg whites, minced meat, and vegetables, creating something known as a raft that trapped impurities. The result? A broth so clear it could double as a mirror. And then comes the barley soup served alongside for those less interested in finesse and more into flavor. It's thick, creamy, and full of pearl barley herbs and beefy comfort. If the consommé is a ballet dancer, the barley soup is a burly uncle in a wool sweater offering you a hug. Some guests prefer one over the other. Others switch halfway through. A man near you discreetly swaps his consommé for his wife's barley when she's not looking. The scandal is microscopic, but in this room, it's practically treason. You sip slowly. Each spoonful feels like a pause, a quiet interlude. And honestly, it's necessary. Because after this broth, you're headed straight into fish territory, and that's where things get slippery. Historians still argue whether Titanic's guests loved the soup course or simply endured it as a social requirement. Contemporary etiquette books insisted that soup was a must even if it delayed the rest of the meal. There were rules, of course. No slurping, no tilting the bowl, and absolutely no using your bread as a spoon, no matter how tempting it might be. But here's a quirky detail. The Titanic had dedicated soup tureens for each table kept warm in specially designed silver-lined boxes. The waiters would ladle your portion tableside, so you got a fresh bowl of hot soup instead of one slowly congealing under a cover somewhere. It was all part of the illusion, making you feel that this soup, this bowl, was meant only for you. As you finish the last spoonful, the waiter removes your bowl with a bow, so subtle you almost miss it. He replaces it with a fresh napkin and a new fork you're too tired to identify. Then he vanishes like some sort of polite culinary ghost. The conversation at the table drifts. Someone mentions postcards. Another person says something ominous about the cold air on deck. But mostly people just murmur content to let the warmth of broth and candlelight lull them into a kind of edible hypnosis. You glance toward the grand windows outside. The sky has shifted into a velvet blue, the stars beginning to sparkle against the vast, unknowable ocean. And inside, on fine bone china, the soup has been served. The rules have been followed. The guests have been softened. You don't realize it yet, but the air tonight is different. Not louder. Not colder, just expectant. But the next course is arriving, and the waiter is holding something covered in sauce. Soup is over. Now things begin to simmer. Your soup bowl is gone. The silver spoon rests quietly on the side plate, ceremoniously retired. Now a new scent glides toward you, buttery, lemony, and unmistakably marine. It's time for the fish course, and tonight it's poached salmon with mousseline sauce. The waiter places it before you, like he's delivering a small miracle. The fillet is pale pink, perfectly flaking at the edges. Beneath it lies a delicate cushion of thin cucumber slices arranged like a mermaid's tail. The mousseline sauce, creamy and frothy, glistens on top, a luxurious mix of hollandaise and whipped cream that's equal parts airy and decadent. You take your first bite. The salmon practically sighs on your fork. It's rich but not overwhelming, and the mousseline melts like silk. It tastes like everything in the world is going exactly to plan. Mainstream historical fact. Fish was always served after soup in formal Edwardian dinners. It was considered essential for proper pacing of the meal, cleansing the palate before the meat courses. Titanic, ever the obedient host, followed this tradition to the letter, even shipping fresh salmon and sole across the Irish Sea in ice-packed crates just for this leg of the voyage. But here's your quirky tidbit. At least one telegram warning about icebergs was being delivered during this exact course on April 14th. That's right. While passengers dined on poached salmon in mousseline and casually judged the floral centerpieces, crew members were passing messages to the bridge about field ice and drifting bergs to the northwest. Historians still argue whether these warnings were taken seriously enough, or if the ship's confidence in her own size and speed led to a kind of floating hubris. But on the dining floor, there's no tension. Not yet. In fact, the only ice anyone's worried about is chilling the Sauternes wine being served alongside the fish. It's a golden dessert wine? Yes, during the fish course, because pairing rules were looser than you'd think. The wine is sweet, crisp, and cuts through the creamy sauce like polite sarcasm at a family dinner. You look around the table. A gentleman is explaining how he once fished for salmon with a duke, no less. A woman is recounting her last trip to the south of France, where the trout was, according to her, unreasonably arrogant. Another simply dabs her lips and murmurs, "Delightful." A steward appears and offers a wedge of lemon. No asking, just an elegant flourish and a silver tongue. You accept. The juice brightens the dish, and for a moment you wonder if this might be the most luxurious thing you've ever eaten while wearing shoes this tight. Outside, the sky is fully dark now. The stars stretch endlessly across the Atlantic sky, more brilliant than most passengers have ever seen. But inside, the chandeliers are still winning. The sparkle is here. The salmon disappears from your plate too quickly. You're not full, but you are satisfied. You wonder what comes next. Then you remember, the entree, plural. More forks are arriving, heavier ones. The ship sails forward through cold, silent water, and somewhere deep in the crew's quarters, another warning message arrives on the wireless. But for now, above the hush of silver on china, the orchestra begins a new piece, a soft, lilting waltz. And your waiter brings the next plate. Your plate is cleared once again, and now it begins the parade of entrees, each more elaborate than the last. You've had oysters, soup, salmon, but those were just the prelude. This is the Edwardian crescendo. Tonight the star on your plate is filet mignon Lily. It sounds delicate, almost dainty. It is not. What arrives is a tenderloin of beef, pan-seared and finished in a rich Madeira demi-glace, so glossy you can almost see your own reflection. It's topped with a decadent slice of foie gras resting like a silk pillow and garnished with truffles, because nothing says restraint like shaving fungus that costs more than a passenger's weekly wages. You take a bite. It's indecent, in the best way. The beef is soft, almost velvety. The sauce is dark, slightly sweet, intensely beefy. The foie gras melts like butter. A new fork appears, shorter, sturdier, and somehow even it feels smug. Mainstream historical fact. Titanic's entrees weren't main courses in the modern sense. In the Edwardian menu structure, entrees were smaller meat dishes served before the roast. Think of them as warm-up acts for the real show. But don't be fooled. These were culinary showpieces, each one handcrafted and flamboyantly sauced. And it's not just filet mignon. Tonight's table also boasts sautéed chicken à la lyonnaise with onions and white wine, lamb with mint sauce, classic and comforting, calves' head and tortue, Yes, mock turtle sauce made from a real calf's head. You skip this one? Politely. Here's your quirky tidbit. Edwardian menus often used French names to elevate the perceived status of a dish. Chicken with onions sounds humble. Poulet sauté à la lyonnaise sounds like it went to boarding school. It's the same chicken, just with a better resume. A steward offers a side of artichoke bottoms and hollandaise. You accept mostly because you're too tired to ask what a vegetable bottom is supposed to be. Beside you, someone tries the turtle sauce and looks quietly betrayed. Historians still argue whether Titanic's first-class menu was designed for gastronomic pleasure or social intimidation. 11 courses each, more French than the last. It's easy to suspect that half the diners spent more time watching their neighbors for clues than enjoying the food. You pause for a sip of claret, a red Bordeaux wine served with these heartier meats. It's rich and dry, and it cuts through the foie gras like a velvet knife. Someone asks the waiter for something American, and the poor man blinks twice before returning with a sherry glass, clearly hoping it will do. Conversation during this course slows. The table has grown quieter, not out of boredom, but focus. The entree demand your attention. Each dish is an architectural feat. Layers of meat sauce garnish precision. There's no room for idle talk when your lamb has been arranged to resemble a flower petal, and your chicken is wearing a glaze like evening wear. Another fork, another plate. You begin to lose track of how many pieces of cutlery you've used. You wonder if your digestive system is taking notes or just silently panicking. And still, the waiter arrives now with roast duckling for those who chose the lighter option. It's roasted until the skin crackles, glazed in orange sauce, and served with a smirk. The entrees begin to disappear one bite at a time, like a slow-motion disappearing act. You lean back slightly. Not full, not yet, but aware. This is the part of the dinner where your body starts to whisper, "Is this necessary?" While your soul responds, "Absolutely." Outside, it's now fully dark. The cold Atlantic stretches on unbothered by sauces and wine pairings. But in here, everything glows. Your plate is cleared again, and just as you think maybe the meal is over, they wheel out the roasts. Because Titanic, she never lets you stop when you're ahead. The waiter reappears with that distinct expression of a man who knows exactly what you're thinking. "Surely we're done now." He says nothing. He just places a new plate in front of you. It's heavier this time. Richer. More imposing. You've reached the roast course. Tonight's selection: roast sirloin of beef with chateau potatoes. The meat is carved into thick crimson slices with a thin seam of fat running along one edge just enough to glisten in the light and make your arteries whisper protest. It's served with rich gravy horseradish sauce and those famous chateau potatoes, little barrel-shaped rounds, pan-roasted to a golden crisp, sitting proudly like tuberous nobility. The beef is fork tender, slightly charred at the edges and deeply savory. One bite and you're transported to some imaginary manor house where roasts are a weekly tradition and servants know your dog's birthday. Mainstream historical fact: roast beef was considered the national dish of England at the time. Serving it on Titanic wasn't just about taste, it was about patriotic identity. Even in the middle of the Atlantic, surrounded by luxury, the Edwardian elite still clung to their beef and potatoes like it was a birthright. And for those not inclined toward beef, there's roast duckling with applesauce, or loin of veal with truffle glaze, or roast squab on toast, which sounds like something a ravenous poet might invent on a dare. But the beef is what matters. This is the comfort course, the homecoming. After the dainty sauces and wobbly mousselines, roast beef is solid ground. The kind of dish that needs no translation, no frilly name, no garnish, shaped like a fleur-de-lis. It simply is. A steward quietly offers you a spoonful of Brussels sprouts, boiled and buttered. You hesitate. They look judgmental. You accept anyway. They're shockingly decent, nutty soft, slightly bitter. Someone nearby adds minted peas to their plate, and you hear a quiet crunch from celeriac served au gratin. Here's your quirky tidbit. Titanic's kitchens employed a roast cook, whose sole job was to manage the various cuts of meat being cooked simultaneously across multiple ovens. Roasts were rotated on iron spits over coal fires, basted constantly, and timed down to the minute. It was hot, brutal work and required near military precision. Historians still argue whether the roast course marked the true midpoint of Titanic's formal dinners, or whether it signaled the emotional peak, where guests felt full enough to drop pretense and just enjoy themselves. Either way, this was the moment when conversation got warmer. Laughter a little louder, and more glasses of claret were requested without apology. Across the table, a man leans back in his chair, wiping his brow with a linen napkin. "I'm beginning to feel like a goose at Michaelmas," he mutters. His wife shushes him, but she's laughing too. You reach for your wine glass, another pour of Bordeaux, and chase the beef down with a sip that tastes like ripe cherries and old furniture. Perfect. The waiter clears your plate, but now the pace has changed. Slowed. You glance around the room. Posture is loosening. Jackets are being unbuttoned. People are visibly relieved that they've made it this far. And just when you think it's time to end things with a digestive, out come the vegetables. No, really. Because after meat comes more sides, and Titanic is not here to let you go gentle into that dessert. You lean back, loosen your belt by one discreet notch, and wonder what roasted turnips have to say about ambition. You were wrong. The roasts weren't the end, they were the pivot point. The meal now swerves sideways into a quieter, sneakier form of indulgence. The vegetable course. Yes, vegetables. On paper, they sound like a break, a breather. But Titanic's take on greens is as over the top as everything else. First to arrive, Duchesse potatoes. Golden spirals piped like frosting crisp on the outside, soft and buttery inside. They're shaped like little crowns and taste like someone invented a love child between mashed potatoes and a croissant. You eat one, then two, then start eyeing a third like it insulted your honor and must be conquered. Next, a platter of carrots Vichy glazed in sugar and butter and so shiny they look waxed. They're tender sweet and just aromatic enough with parsley to make you feel vaguely virtuous again. Then there's the cauliflower au gratin bubbling beneath a browned cheese crust and a medley of braised celery and white turnips cooked just to the edge of softness. Everything is buttery. Everything is salted within reason. And everything feels just slightly unnecessary, yet you wouldn't dream of saying no. Mainstream historical fact. Edwardian meals included a separate vegetable course rather than mixing them onto the same plate as meat. It was both a stylistic and cultural decision meant to showcase variety, seasonality, and restraint, ironically. Even the vegetables had to dress for dinner. A waiter offers asparagus tips with hollandaise, and you nod because by now your answer to everything is yes. The spears are bright green, still snappy, and blanketed in a sauce that tastes like egg yolks on vacation. Here's your quirky tidbit. Titanic's kitchen used imported French butter for its first-class sauces, brought on board in thick parchment-wrapped bricks. Why? Because English butter was considered too salty for refined palates. In fact, White Star Line kept butter samples in silver tins for the chef to taste test daily. Imagine being that picky on a moving ship. Historians still argue whether the vegetables were truly enjoyed or simply served as palate resets between heavier dishes. Most believe the latter, though the frequent pairing with lavish sauces, béchamel, velouté hollandaise, suggests they were meant to impress just as much as the roasts. Across from you, a woman is dissecting her artichoke heart like she's cracking a safe. A gentleman beside her smears potato onto a piece of bread, scandalizing no one. At this point in the meal, the strictest rules have softened. The diners are easing into their chairs, their conversation turning to memories, holidays, and that summer in Monte Carlo. You notice someone asking for a second helping of spinach soufflé. The waiter smiles, disappears, and returns with it in under 30 seconds. Like magic. But beneath the calm elegance, there's a hint of bloat, an undercurrent of fatigue. You've passed the halfway mark. You are both sated and curious. Your appetite now a strange balance of desire and sheer commitment. You didn't come this far to skip a single bite. And yet, when the waiter clears your plate and announces the next course, a collective murmur of both dread and delight travels the room like a polite gasp. Because next comes the pudding. You breathe in, sit up straighter. You are ready, but also just a little afraid. The waiter returns this time with a softer smile, one that says, We've survived the meets together, and now, we dessert. You hear the faint clatter of silver trolleys, the telltale scent of vanilla citrus and warm sugar trailing into the air like perfume. It's time for pudding, but this isn't just one pudding. No. This is the grand dessert course, Titanic style, a multi-dish, multi-texture, multi-utensil finale that deserves its own fanfare. Your plate arrives with a polite flourish, and you're greeted by something that shimmers, Chartreuse jelly. Yes, jelly, but not the kind from a jar. This one's molded into a fluted dome quivering gently under the candlelight and tinted a pale green from its namesake chartreuse liqueur made by French monks using 130 different herbs. The flavor, sweet herbal, a little mysterious. It's like if an after-dinner mint in a greenhouse had a child. Next comes a generous wedge of Waldorf pudding, a warm custardy blend of apples, raisins, and cinnamon-laced sponge cake topped with a layer of creamy sauce. It's rich, soft, and exactly what your soul didn't know it needed after 17 courses of opulence. Mainstream historical fact. On April 14, 1912, the last dinner ever served aboard Titanic Waldorf pudding was the official dessert. Named for the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York, it represented everything fashionable and modern. Serving it was both a culinary choice and a nod to the cosmopolitan aspirations of the ship's elite. A steward glides by with a tray of eclairs filled with vanilla cream and topped with dark chocolate so glossy it reflects the chandelier overhead. You take one, obviously. You bite into it and time slows. It's sweet cold and just the right amount of wrong. Here's your quirky tidbit. Titanic's pastry kitchen had a dedicated jelly chef. His job: molding, chilling, unmolding, and presenting jellies so intricate they often featured layers of fruit suspended midair. One version reportedly included slices of blood orange and slivered almonds in an exact symmetrical pattern, because symmetry, as everyone knows, is the true taste of wealth. Historians still argue whether Titanic's desserts were primarily enjoyed or merely admired. Many guests reportedly requested small bites, worried that indulging too much would make them appear gluttonous. Of course, that didn't stop them from requesting seconds quietly. A fresh plate appears with assorted cheeses, Stilton Cheshire and Brie served with crackers and a cluster of grapes. So perfect you suspect a still-life painter has been following you around all evening. This cheese course acts like a palate cleanser, salty, sharp grounding. Then there's the fruit bowl. Slices of pineapple, chilled oranges, stewed figs, and the star of the Edwardian table grapes on the vine, cold and plump, served on silver tongs. Someone picks theirs off individually, like they're choosing rubies from a necklace. You reach for a macaron from a shared plate, pistachio pale green crackling gently at the edges. Another guest tries the lemon sponge, sighs contentedly, and mutters, "That'll do me in." The waiter just nods. He's seen this before. Coffee is offered strong black, served in porcelain cups that clink delicately on matching saucers. A few guests take theirs with sugar, some with cream. Others, more daring, opt for cognac or port to accompany their final sweet. You choose cognac. It burns gently like a bedtime story read with firelight. The orchestra is still playing something light, something French. Conversation has turned quiet, words slurred not by drink, but by deep, pervasive fullness. Everyone is smiling. Everyone is leaning back. And beneath the table shoes have been discreetly unbuckled. You sit still for a moment. Not eating, just being. A soft warmth settles into your chest and the thought dawns. This was more than a meal. It was a performance, a ritual, a memory made from sugar, fire, cream, and steel. And it's not quite over. There's still coffee. And there's still conversation to finish. Let's move now, not forward but down. Back to the lower decks where the tuxedos and molded jellies fade from view and the dining feels different. Steerage dinners didn't come with wine pairings or foie gras, but they weren't grim either. On Titanic, even the humblest class sat down to warm, filling evening meals, simple, honest, and sometimes surprisingly good. You slip into the third-class dining saloon again. It's louder now, buzzing with families corralling children, travelers sharing stories of lost luggage and found opportunities, and the rhythmic thump of someone playing a jig on a borrowed tin whistle in the corner. Dinner is served in 2 seatings since the room can't fit all the steerage passengers at once. There's a queue at the entrance, cheerful and expectant, like people waiting for church supper. You sit with a group of Irish laborers, a pair of German seamstresses, and a baby who seems deeply suspicious of your hat. Tonight's menu: rice soup followed by roast beef with brown gravy, boiled potatoes, pickled beets, and for dessert, yes, dessert plum pudding with a splash of sweet sauce. The soup is thin but hot and nourishing. The beef is chewy but well seasoned, and the pudding, dense, sticky, laced with raisins and the faint ghost of last year's brandy. Mainstream historical fact: Titanic served 3 full meals per day to steerage passengers, a rare luxury at the time. Many ships barely offered food at all, expecting passengers to bring their own or purchase it from overpriced canteens. White Star Line marketed Titanic's steerage fare as a selling point. Meals served by stewards, clean utensils, plenty of food. That was revolutionary. You eat with a simple tin fork sip from a plain cup and glance around. No one's wearing gloves or dinner jackets, but there's joy here. The joy of having enough, of being fed without judgment. Here's your quirky tidbit. Titanic's steerage menu was often bilingual, printed in both English and the passenger's native language like Swedish or Italian. The idea was to make sure no one went hungry from confusion alone. That level of consideration was rare and deeply appreciated. The conversation turns toward America, what it'll look like, what jobs might be waiting, how different the streets will smell. One young woman whispers that she's never seen a skyscraper. A man beside her claims he'll work for a year, then open a bakery. He doesn't say where. Maybe he doesn't know yet. You finish your roast potatoes and lean back slightly. Someone offers a slice of cabin bread, the infamously hard, dry biscuit that's served mostly for tradition's sake. You take a small bite. It's not bad, if you've recently angered your dentist. The stewards here are fewer but kind. They know names already. Remember who likes more gravy and who always asks for seconds. One carries a pitcher of sweet tea, strong and nearly syrupy. Another is passing out extra spoons for the pudding, his apron stained with pride. Historians still argue whether steerage meals on Titanic were sustainable, whether they could have lasted the full voyage at this level of quality, or whether it was a front-heavy display meant to impress earlies. But memoirs from survivors suggest the food held steady. The kindness, too. You stand when the meal ends, your stomach filled, your heart quietly brimming. Someone has started a tune on a fiddle. 2 boys clap in time. The dining room begins to empty out, slow and warm like a bonfire cooling under moonlight. And as you step into the corridor heading toward the stairs that lead back into the grandeur above you, realize something small but important. Dinner in 3rd class wasn't about indulgence. It was about belonging. Back in 1st class, the air has shifted. You've had your roast, your potatoes, your pudding, and your coffee. You're more full than you've ever been yet somehow, because the Edwardians were both unstoppable and deeply ceremonial. It's time for the final indulgence. The digestive ritual of late evening. It's not technically part of dinner. It's what comes after. The elegant coda, the soft landing. A steward quietly guides you from the now cleared dining saloon to the 1st class smoking room, where the atmosphere feels instantly different. Quieter, more intimate. Velvet chairs, dark wood paneling, soft lamps. The scent of cigar smoke, leather gloves, and something rich and bittersweet coffee brandy and burnt sugar. You take a seat. A small table is already set with crystal glasses, a bowl of candied orange peel, and a decanter that glows like amber in the lamplight. Tonight's after-dinner fare includes coffee black and finely ground served in delicate cups with gold rims, cognac warming your throat in slow velvet waves, crystallized ginger and candied fruit, small jewel-like bites meant to gently reawaken your senses, cigars for the gentlemen and the bolder ladies pulled from cedar boxes lit with long matches that glow like tiny torches. Mainstream historical fact. The 1st class smoking room was men only for most of the evening, though Titanic was modern enough to allow women in later hours. It was modeled after exclusive London clubs, Leather armchairs, card tables, and brandy snifters. No dancing, just talk, and the slow unwinding of the day's ceremony. Here's your quirky tidbit. Titanic's smoking room included a custom-carved fireplace mantel imported from France, fitted with an electric heater disguised as coal fire, because open flames were a no-go on a ship, but appearances still mattered. The conversation here is different, slower, looser. One man grumbles about the stock market. Another shares a ghost story. Someone quotes Kipling, "A glass is raised." Another is refilled. Voices drift into a low hum like the sound of embers shifting in a hearth. You're offered liqueurs, anisette crème de menthe, and something called yellow chartreuse. Again, because the monks who made it were truly having a moment in 1912. You choose a small pour. It tastes like citrus medicine and pine all at once. Across the room, someone is playing cribbage. Another is explaining the rules of baccarat poorly. A steward floats by with a silver dish of cheese straws, and you take one not out of hunger, but from a kind of momentum. Historians still argue whether the post-dinner ritual was more about digestion or display. But one thing's certain, it was the denouement. The final paragraph in the novel that was dinner. It let people transition out of performance and back into themselves, or at least into the version of themselves they wanted to be by moonlight. Some guests linger, some slip away to promenades or parlors. A few already weary excuse themselves for bed murmuring about early strolls and fresh air. But many stay, because this is the only moment in the day where no one's judging your fork usage or your French pronunciation. This is just people relaxing at last. Full, quiet, softened by food and flickering light. You lean back in your chair, the cigar smoke curling like a ghost toward the ceiling. You're no longer counting courses. There's no menu, just warmth, laughter, a little bitterness on the tongue. The orchestra has gone quiet. The sea hums beneath you like a sleeping giant. And somewhere far above, stars sharpen against the dark sky like spilled silver pins. Tonight, on the most magnificent ship ever built, you dined like royalty. And now your plate is empty, but your memory, still glowing. Let's roll back the clock just a bit, not to change history, but to revisit Sunday aboard the Titanic. Because Sunday dinner, that's not just another meal. It's a sacred institution wrapped in starch and drizzled with gravy. On April 14, 1912, a Sunday first-class passengers aboard Titanic enjoyed the final full day of uninterrupted meals, including one of the most indulgent and symbolic traditions in British culinary life, Sunday roast. You walk once more into the first-class dining saloon. The chandeliers sparkle with an almost holy glow. The linen is extra crisp, the waitstaff even more attentive. There's something in the air today. Not tension, not foreboding, just a deeper formality. Sunday dinner calls for respect. At your table, the menu reflects this tone. It's centered on the goose roast goose with apple stuffing to be precise. Rich aromatic with crackling skin and a savory sweet filling that smells like sage onion and fall holidays. It's the kind of meal that makes you nostalgic for a home you never lived in. Beside it, buttered peas, roasted root vegetables, Yorkshire pudding, and a boat of thick brown gravy that's more like a declaration than a sauce. Mainstream historical fact. Sunday roasts were a deeply ingrained part of British culture, often seen as a weekly ritual that combined religion, family, and comfort food. Titanic honored that tradition, serving proper roasts and full spreads every Sunday, no matter where on the Atlantic she sailed. And not just in first class. Second class was treated to roast mutton and rice pudding that day. Steerage passengers received cold meats, cheese bread, and tea lighter, but still respectful of the day's spirit. No one went hungry, and everyone felt part of something larger. Here's your quirky tidbit. Many passengers changed clothes specifically for Sunday dinner, even if they didn't attend the ship's religious services earlier in the day. A special meal required special attention. For some, it was the most normal part of their week at sea, a reminder of routines back home. As the goose is served, conversation softens. The clatter of cutlery slows. A hush spreads across the dining room, not out of solemnity, but reverence. This isn't food, it's ritual. It's heritage. It's Edwardian hospitality at its most comforting. You sip a glass of burgundy fruity and robust perfect with roast meat. A neighboring guest murmurs approval of the stuffing. Another nods and declares, "The duck last night was a song, but this is a hymn." At another table, an elderly man offers a toast. "To the week ahead and to landfall." Glasses clink. There's an undercurrent of optimism in the room, a quiet certainty that this is the midpoint of the journey. New York is just days away. And this dinner, like the ship, is unsinkable. The waiter offers seconds. You politely decline, then accept anyway. The Yorkshire pudding is too good to waste. Crisp on the edges, custardy inside, made to soak up gravy like it was born to do so. Dessert is a warm apple tart, glazed and golden, with a dollop of thick cream spooned on at the table. Not flashy, not fussy, just right. You lean back and glance around. The room glows. Bellies are full. Everyone looks just a little more human than they did a few days ago. Historians still argue whether the luxury of Titanic's meals dulled passengers' instincts, created a sense of overconfidence, or simply masked the lurking dangers beyond the hull. But in that moment on that Sunday night, no one was thinking of ice or fate. They were thinking of roast goose.